So it's a very great pleasure to hand over to you, Jess. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thanks, Rod. That was lovely. Kia ora koutou, everyone. As Rod said, I'm Jess Berentson Shaw. I'm down here in Whanganui-a-Tara on a rainy, windy day. That seems appropriate. I was born and raised here under these windy skies, and my ancestors came here from another windy, big-skied place, Keith in Scotland. As Rod said, I'm a social scientist. I'm really interested in the ways in which our thinking and the ways in which we communicate affect our ability and willingness to understand complex and challenging issues, especially those that are affecting our collective health and well-being, like those Rod talked about and many of you are dealing with. So I research ways to talk about issues like climate change, mode shift, urban density changes, poverty, and how we can talk in different ways to deepen people's understanding and build support for the types of transformative change that are in front of us. So I currently, as Rod said, do that as the co-director of the workshop. So I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me while the technology fairies hopefully work. I'm going to put that onto slideshow. Great. Okay. So we're in a time when transforming the ways that we live, work, play, move, learn, earn have huge potential for the well-being of our planet. And I think for many of us in this space, we know that the changes that are ahead of us can make a huge difference to all of us, whether that's redesigning our cities to enable everybody to get where they need to go, rethinking how our economic system can centre the health of the environment, changing how we build and distribute housing so that all people have a warm and stable home and vibrant, creative, prospering communities, fully embracing the Māori intent of Te Tiriti of Waitangi, so all New Zealanders are valued. Today I'm going to talk about why these changes are necessary now and much of the work that we do, and why when we engage in it, we've got to be prepared for the work of shifting people's mindsets, and how particularly narratives can help in this work, because that's the area obviously that I specialise in. I'm going to give you 6 shifts that I think that we need to make in order to activate helpful mindsets, deepen people's thinking and improve decision making, and so enable us to better do the work of change that we're engaged in or trying to engage in. So many of the big issues that we're facing in our world won't be solved at what we would call the downstream level, not while there are systems, structures in place upstream that are causing a lot of the problems. We can't ask people who are the most harmed by our current systems and structures, whether that's children who are being injured on roads and cities that aren't designed to take care of them, to simply change their behaviour or make better choices, which is something that we might traditionally have done in the past. It's simply not right, and the research tells us that it's not particularly effective either. However, what we can do is create an enabling environment. And by that, I mean through systems, policies, practices, and transformations to our environment, we can support people to easily behave differently. So changing the things that will make the biggest difference, I guess I would call is the most efficient, effective, and ethical way to improve people's well-being. But, and I apologise a little bit for this. Oh no, it's the next slide, so I'm looking at the wrong slide. Making changes that make the biggest difference isn't always the easiest path to take, as Rod has alluded to. That's putting it mildly, I think. Transforming our systems and structures, like changing our urban environments or our urban density, supporting more people walking and riding, changing our health delivery systems to meet the needs of Māori, need public support. We need a commitment to changes from people in the public, because without that public understanding and public support, these structural and policy shifts are hard to achieve. Or we can do them, but they are hard to keep in place and they'll be dialed back. COVID's a good example of where we needed people's mindsets to support what we're doing and their support for particular interventions. Lockdowns, mass vaccination programs did require the public understanding and public support for them to happen. The big question is how on some of our bigger, longer term, slower, rapidly speeding up crisis can we deepen people's understanding and build support? for changes that make the biggest difference. And this is where my work comes in, and the science of mindsets and narratives can be one tool. It's not the only tool, but they can be one tool that we need to be thinking about using in this work. This is the slide I wanted to apologize for because it's a very boring, typically academic slide. But this is from some authors, some researchers called Cannier and all, and they talk about that there are 6 conditions of transformative change. And it's one way to conceptualize and think about how change happens and how we can shift the conditions that are currently holding the problems we're experiencing in place. So at the top, you can see structural changes, practices, policies, resources. That's the stuff that we can see, sometimes the boring legislative stuff, and that we can name easily. It's really explicit. We can see that stuff. It's easy to see. In the middle are relationships and power dynamics. And that is how we relate to one another, who gets to talk and who gets to decide. We can sometimes see that, and sometimes we don't see it, but those are important conditions. They're semi-explicit ones. And then the ones that I'm particularly interested in that we need to ensure enduring success of these other conditions of change is shifting people's mindsets. And that's the hardest to see, or the implicit. And very much the other conditions of systems change will fall or rise on the basis of how successful we are in shifting those mindsets and keeping them there. So mindsets are the waters very much that people swim in. It's the stuff we can't see. It's all around us, and it's influencing our thinking and decisions every day without us even being aware of it. As much as we would like to think that they're not having an influence, that we're logically and rational people, social science is pretty clear that this is affecting a lot of our decision making. And so what we see is that mindsets really shape what we see as normal or a problem. They shape how we think the world works or how society is structured. They shape who we think is important, who matters the most, and they shape our willingness to support transformations to our systems, policies, and practices, and ultimately the success of their implementation. They're very much part of our culture. So different cultures will have different mindsets, but when we exist in a particular culture, that the dominant culture will fairly much set a lot of the mindsets by which are operating on us. And you might have heard terms like mental models or schemas or cultural mindsets, and this is the same idea generally. And we get them from living in our culture. We get them from being exposed to public discourse through news and entertainment media. And we just get them through our everyday interactions and our conversations, the backyard barbecue, dare I say it, families, schools, and community groups. And this is really critical. Mindsets, when we think about how we engage in changes that will make the biggest difference and involve some level of transformational change, mindsets really are going to be a thing that we're having to deal with. So shared or cultural mindsets have an important relationship with our shared narrative. So we all know we're in a very busy information environment. It's filled with stories, words, and pictures every day. You'll feel it every day when you open your email, your social media, your radio, just your conversations. There's a lot of information out there. And narratives are a particular pattern of meaning in this information environment. So they tie together different stories and words and pictures. And when we communicate through these different means, narratives give us a common way to organize and make sense of information. We make meaning from all of this different information. They're like a golden thread, really. And the common meanings often reflect shared ways of thinking and reasoning, in other words, our mindsets. So how do these mindsets develop and what holds them in place? Well, you won't be unfamiliar, I'm sure, by our information environment and how that may or may not create unhelpful thinking. But the process by which information and stories and ultimately narratives get out of step with perhaps where we need to be, maybe best current understandings, is very contextual. As I said, we get information from a myriad of places: family, friends, advertising, media, education. And so the narratives and mindsets that dominate tend to be shaped in this very noisy information environment. And it's useful to know that there are, and you will know this, particular people, players, who are trying specifically to shape that information and narratives for their own good. So we can be exposed frequently to unhelpful narratives and unhelpful mindsets through digital and other media. People can create and contribute to unhelpful mindsets and narratives with particular ill intent to maintain status quo systems or benefit themselves. Now, obviously, we've seen a lot of the impact of misinformation and disinformation during the COVID pandemic. People can also spread unhelpful narratives and embed unproductive mindsets without any ill intent. You know yourselves how easy it is to share things on social media, to talk about it because you're concerned or worried. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're sharing it with ill intent. But once bad information and unhelpful narratives are in place, it is quite hard to shift them. And an important thing to know from the cognitive sciences is that we have fast thinking brains that will actually protect shallow or unhelpful ways of thinking. So where people will hold unproductive or unhelpful mindsets about issues, we have a rather evolved mental processing system that can hold them in place. So some of you may have heard of Daniel Kahneman and his work in the cognitive social sciences. He has named what we call a fast thinking system. And these are the extensively studied mental shortcuts that we have that help us cope with a vast amount of information in the world and protect existing reasoning. So fast thinking systems include things like confirmation bias, omission bias, motivated reasoning, status quo bias, of some things you might have heard about. The fast thinking system is actually really useful and helpful. It means that we unconsciously process information quite quickly. We don't have to stop and relearn anything. But what it does mean is we respond with emotion and feelings to information, and we use logic to backfill our existing position. And we all do this, no matter how much we claim to be entirely logical, because that's an effective and efficient system for us. It does mean that we grasp the concrete and we shy away from the abstract. Availability bias, for example, means we frequently grasp explanations that come most readily and easily to our mind. So you can see how this starts to interact with some unhelpful mindsets. And it is a really serious challenge for having productive public conversations about more complex social and environmental issues, especially as the information we need people to understand changes. And so when we're talking about science in particularly, in a moving body of science, it can be particularly challenging. So we have an information environment that may provide unhelpful information, and does. We have fast brains that take shortcuts to process information, what makes it hard when we have complex or new issues that need explaining and understanding. But we also have habitual ways of communicating when we're interested in changing complex issues, and our own mindsets about how we can help people better understand or support transformative change. Often we see ourselves as experts and advocates who communicate in complex issues. Many of us will make the assumption that if we fill people up with good information, any incorrect reasoning will be corrected. And that's our own mindset that we hold about communication and knowledge transfer. And we call this the information deficit model. And when that mindset is in place and the habituated behaviours that go with it, we tend to communicate in a few very common ways. We either construct our communications around a particular noisy, oppositional, but minority group narrative and mindset to show how wrong they are and to give them all of the proof about how wrong they are. But this, in effect, works to expose more people to an unhelpful and unproductive way of thinking. The other thing that we do is we lead with facts a lot. The problem with that is that while facts are important when we're doing this work, they can't create new patterns of meaning for people. And people will find a way, we see in experiments, to fit facts, new facts, even discordant ones that don't fit with how they currently think. They will fit them into existing mindsets rather than review understandings entirely. So our habituated ways of communicating can also act as an impediment or a barrier to the types of transformative change that we want people to understand and support. So what do we do? And this is where narrative strategies and the science and research can help a little bit. It's not the answer, it's a tool that's useful and has some science behind it. Now, I think that there are 6 shifts that we can make as communicators, as advocates, as people with lived experience who are working hard to shift some of our systems. And the first one is around these mindsets. Your work should be to shift mindsets. When we're engaged in transformation, it's critical to see it as important and as a core goal. Transformation won't happen with a goal focused on ruffling the least amount of feathers with a universally popular message. So you should be seeking to shift mindsets by changing existing narratives that dominate in the public conversation. As the cognitive linguist and messaging expert Inek Shenker-Osorio says, good messaging is not about what something's popular, it's about making popular what needs to be said, and I would add what needs to be understood. The second shift that I think we make is around the people who you engage with. Changing dominant, unhelpful mindsets and narratives means we need to stop engaging with those people who hold very fast to unhelpful mindsets. Transformative shifts and changes will mean you come up against oppositional mindsets and narratives. You will not and should not try to shift those who rigidly adhere to them. They're very ideologically opposed to change, and they're very hard to persuade for a good reason. But if you listen to these people, if you seek their feedback, if you measure the impact of your communications by their response, you will never achieve the transformative change you're working towards, and will often end up backing away from the transformations that most people need. And this is an issue of equity, and it's an issue of justice. So instead, the work is with those people who you can shift mindsets of, and we call these the potentially persuadable people. And the good news is that they actually represent most people on an issue. So we see in our research over and over again that the people who are most deeply opposed to transformative shifts are not normally the majority. They're not the people you need to persuade. And the picture I'm showing you is New Zealanders' mindsets about climate change. And it's from the 6 New Zealand's climate change attitudes that Paul Winton did. And I'd just like to note that numerous studies have shown this over and over again. You'll see that most of us are either already convinced or are potentially able to understand and support the types of changes we need on climate change. And these are the people who need your transformations. In the case of climate change, often these people will want something to happen, but they're stuck in not knowing or feeling fatalistic that things will change at the scale that's required. And the minority of people will oppose change. Often they're invested in the status quo. We shouldn't forget that there is power involved in here and power dynamics. So they will do so loudly, and they will use all the mechanisms that they have available to them in the status quo systems to do so. And you need to prepare your leaders for that reality if they are truly engaged in transformation. And that means being smart about measuring the impact of your mindset shift work. You need to identify prior to this who the change is for and who it's going to benefit most. Again, this is an issue in equity. Identify who you can deepen understandings in, and this is about thinking about your potentially persuadable people, and make sure you are measuring the response of these two groups in your base and persuadable, not your hard to persuade. So the third shift, tell people what you stand for, not why this opposition narrative is wrong. If you spend time simply telling people why the unhelpful narrative is wrong and giving them lots of facts around it to try and counter it and lots of data, you are amplifying the unhelpful mindset and narrative. Your job is to know the mindset that you want to bring to the surface and to use your narrative to constantly hold it there. It will be a fight. Never think that the battle is won, but with friends and supporters and fellow advocates, you can hold the new narrative in place. And there are lots of tools that can help you build these narratives. I'm going to talk about 3 now. The first is about leading with a vision, the cake, the better world you want once the changes are made. Leading with the cake means you're not leading with problems. That doesn't mean we don't talk about problems and we don't talk about those people who are most harmed. We just don't lead with it. Leading with the cake also means you don't lead with the ingredients that you need to make the cake. This is why cookbooks have pictures of finished cakes on them, not a picture of a list of ingredients on it. A cycleway, an integrated transport network, a new urban planning strategy, that's the ingredients for how we get the thing that we want, the better world. And it's compelling to those of us who are working in the change, but it's not particularly compelling to those people who might quite like to think about the change but don't know where to go, or are influenced by unhelpful dominant narratives in the opposite direction. Now, I'd just like to make a note here about who envisaged this better world, because those who the systems are currently excluding and hurting the most are the people who should be doing the vision making. They are the people who have a reason to think about a better world. They are the people who have had to innovate and lead in order to operate in the existing one that constrains them. And they are the best people to see how the world can and should be better. And I think we should have an agreement that we don't want any more visions from people who the world works very well for at the moment. Number 5, shifting to values. I'm watching my time, Rod. I'm just about there. So values are the why of life. They're our core human motivation: love, security, power, responsibility. And values are in all our communications because we want to motivate people to listen and pay attention. This is why this should matter to you, we're saying. But the values we often draw upon in our habituated communications are those that tend to dominate in our noisy information environment, in advertising, media, or elsewhere. And those values are often telling us we should care, we should buy a product, or we should support this issue because it will save us money, it will make us rich, give us power, make us look good, or save us from a terrible outcome. These values frame the world and the issues around us in terms of individual loss and gain. What's in it for me? What will I lose? If you want people to shift their mindset so they understand and support transformations that are about the bigger us, the collective we, then we need to start framing conversations through those values that are about the bigger us and the collective we, our care for others, our love for family and friends, our sense of responsibility to the next generation, the desire to live in the world that's beautiful. The good news is that these are, we see, the values that people most highly prioritize. They might just not be able to act on them right now. And number 6, shift to explaining. So shifting to a good explanation is really critical. Facts are not an explanation for how a problem happened and who and how we can fix it. Standalone facts about the existence won't shift an existing mindset. Rather, it leaves a gap that fast thinking will fill with an existing mindset. You need a good explanation, and it features facts as a character in your story, but not the whole story. And that story needs to reflect your broader narrative and the mindset shift. Oh, I snuck an extra one in number 7 at 20 minutes. And that's remembering that narratives are core concepts found within patterns, words, images, and stories. And you need as many stories, words, and images as possible, activating these core mindsets if you're going to shift them. And that means you need to work together with people. This is about collaborative and collective action. And the good news is that the transformations we're trying to make are about collaborative and collective action. So work together as much as you can across groups and fields and come together to try and shift mindsets. Okay, that's it. 21 minutes, Rod. So I'm going to stop sharing now.